Stop scrolling. This message will save you from a dangerous trap. Urgent warning. What authorities and systems are beginning to notice is not what most people expect. It's not about fear, it's about awareness. Because in today's world, every action leaves a trace, every decision creates a pattern, and every pattern tells a story that can no longer be ignored. Before you scroll away, understand this clearly. This message is not here to create panic, it is here to wake you up. Stay until the end, because what you are about to hear could completely change how you understand your privacy, your decisions, and the invisible systems around your daily life. Most people never realize the trap they are in until they are already caught inside it. There is a dangerous pattern forming in modern life, not always visible, not always obvious, but always present. It begins when people stop paying attention to details, when they click, agree, accept, and move forward without thinking. Slowly, without noticing, they step into systems that study behavior, track patterns, and learn reactions. Not necessarily to harm, but to understand, predict, and influence outcomes. The real trap is not one single event. It is repetition. It is routine. It is the silent normalization of things that once felt unusual. When awareness is low, even obvious signals feel normal. That is how people lose control of their own direction without ever realizing it happened. You must understand this. Every system built on information depends on behavior. Every behavior creates a pattern, and every pattern can be analyzed. This is why awareness is no longer optional. It is protection. What authorities, analysts, and systems often discover is not sudden events, but long-term patterns that were ignored by individuals for too long, small signs that were dismissed, repeated behaviors that were never questioned, choices that seemed harmless at the time but created bigger consequences later. The dangerous trap is believing nothing is happening just because nothing obvious is visible. In reality, most important developments happen quietly first, behind routines, behind habits, behind everyday decisions. But here is the truth that changes everything. Awareness breaks the trap. The moment you start observing your patterns, questioning your habits, and thinking before reacting, you step outside of automatic control. You regain clarity. You regain direction. You regain power over your own choices. This is not about fear. This is about consciousness. Because those who are aware cannot be easily misled, and those who notice patterns early are never fully trapped. So if you are hearing this now, it is not random. It is a reminder. Slow down, observe, and think. Because the biggest danger is not what is watching you, it is what you are ignoring. There is a growing reality that most people do not fully understand, and it begins with a simple truth. Every action you take in the modern world leaves behind a trace. Not just in obvious ways, but in subtle patterns that form over time. The way you click, the things you search, the posts you pause on, the choices you repeat, and even the habits you think are private all contribute to a digital footprint that builds a clearer picture of your behavior than you might expect. This does not mean you are under personal suspicion, but it does mean that observation in today's world is no longer limited to what is visible on the surface. Systems, platforms, and technologies are designed to recognize patterns, not individuals in isolation, but behavior as a whole. And when behavior becomes predictable, it becomes understandable, and when it becomes understandable, it becomes measurable. This is where awareness becomes important, because most people do not realize how much of their life is shaped by repetition rather than intention. They fall into routines without questioning them. They accept suggestions without reflection, and they move through digital spaces as if nothing is being recorded or interpreted. Yet behind every simple action is a layer of data that contributes to a larger behavioral map. The real issue is not that observation exists, but that people stop paying attention to what their own actions are revealing about them. When awareness is absent, even harmless behavior can become part of a pattern that influences future outcomes in ways they never expected. This is why understanding your own digital behavior is not about fear, but about clarity. When you begin to notice your own patterns, you regain control over them. You start to act with intention instead of reaction. You become more conscious of where your attention goes and why it goes there. And in a world where attention is constantly being measured, shaped, and redirected, awareness is the only way to remain truly present and in control of your own direction. Hidden traps are built through ignored details and patterns. Most dangerous situations in life do not begin as something obvious or dramatic. They start quietly, almost invisibly inside the small details that people tend to overlook. A single ignored moment, a repeated habit, or a choice made without full attention may seem harmless on its own, but when these moments are connected over time, they form a pattern. And patterns are where everything begins to change. The human mind is naturally designed to focus on immediate concerns rather than long-term repetition, which is why many people fail to notice when something is slowly shaping their direction. They see events as separate incidents instead of understanding them as part of a larger structure. This is how traps form, not through force but through familiarity. When something happens once, it is forgotten. When it happens twice, it is dismissed. When it happens repeatedly, it becomes accepted as normal. And once something feels normal, it stops being questioned. This is where awareness becomes critical, because what you ignore today does not disappear. It simply becomes part of a growing pattern that influences tomorrow. Many of the situations people later describe as unexpected were actually developing for a long time through small ignored signs. A warning that felt insignificant, a feeling that was dismissed, a behavior that was repeated without reflection. Each one seems too small to matter, but together they form a direction that can quietly guide decisions, reactions, and outcomes. The real danger is not the presence of these patterns, but the absence of attention toward them. When life becomes automatic, people stop observing themselves. They react instead of think. They repeat instead of evaluate. And in that repetition, they slowly step into situations they never consciously chose. This is how traps are built in modern life, not through sudden events, but through unnoticed accumulation. Awareness breaks this cycle. The moment you begin to notice repetition, question habits, and reflect on small details, you interrupt the formation of hidden patterns. You shift from passive behavior to conscious action. And in doing so, you prevent small ignored moments from becoming larger consequences that shape your future without your permission. Comfort can quietly turn into a dangerous psychological trap. Comfort is one of the most misunderstood forces in human life because it rarely appears harmful at first. In fact, it often feels safe, stable, and rewarding. It gives the mind a sense of relief from stress, uncertainty, and pressure, which is why people naturally gravitate toward it. But over time, comfort can slowly begin to change its role. What once felt like protection can gradually become limitation. What once felt like rest can become stagnation. And what once felt like security can quietly turn into a form of restriction that is difficult to recognize while you are inside it. The danger of comfort is not that it harms you directly, but that it reduces your willingness to change. When life feels predictable, the mind stops searching for improvement. When routines feel easy, effort feels unnecessary. When situations feel familiar, questioning them feels uncomfortable. And so, without realizing it, a person begins to choose repetition over growth, familiarity over progress, and safety over possibility. This shift does not happen suddenly, it happens gradually, through small decisions that feel completely reasonable at the time. Most people do not notice this transformation because comfort does not announce itself as a problem. It does not feel like a trap. It feels like peace. But beneath that surface, something subtle is happening. The boundaries of your thinking begin to shrink. Your willingness to explore new paths begins to weaken. Your tolerance for uncertainty decreases, and slowly your world becomes smaller, not because you are forced into it, but because you stop stepping beyond it. This is how psychological traps form in everyday life. Not through fear or pressure, but through ease and repetition. The mind prefers what is familiar, even when the familiar no longer supports growth. And once comfort becomes a habit, breaking away from it feels more difficult than staying inside it, even when staying no longer serves you. Awareness is what interrupts this cycle. When you begin to recognize that comfort can sometimes limit rather than protect, you regain the ability to choose differently. You start to question whether ease is truly helping you or quietly holding you back. And in that moment of awareness, comfort loses its control because you are no longer living inside it blindly. You are observing it with clarity and intention. What you ignore today can become tomorrow's biggest problem. One of the most consistent truths in life is that consequences rarely appear without warning. They begin quietly, long before they become visible, forming in the background of decisions that seemed unimportant at the time. What most people fail to realize is that problems do not suddenly appear fully grown. They develop from small, repeated moments of neglect. A detail ignored, a concern dismissed, a pattern overlooked, or a feeling pushed aside may not seem significant in isolation, but over time, these small moments begin to accumulate. And what accumulates silently eventually becomes something impossible to ignore. The human mind has a natural tendency to prioritize what feels urgent over what feels subtle. This is why many early signs of change are dismissed. People assume that if something is important, it will demand attention immediately. But life does not always work that way. Some of the most critical shifts begin quietly, without urgency, without pressure, and without clear signals. Because of this, they are often ignored until they grow large enough to demand attention in ways that feel overwhelming. What you ignore today does not remain static. It continues to evolve in the background of your life. A small imbalance can become a larger disruption. A repeated pattern can turn into a defining cycle. A neglected warning can become a situation that feels unavoidable. This is not because life is working against you, but because attention was not given at the moment it was needed most. The real challenge is not dealing with problems when they appear, but recognizing them while they are still forming. Awareness at an early stage has the power to change outcomes completely. It allows correction before consequences become permanent. It gives you the ability to adjust direction while the path is still flexible. This is why attention is not just observation, it is prevention. When you begin to notice small inconsistencies, reflect on repeated experiences, and take your instincts seriously, you interrupt the growth of future problems. You shift from reacting to consequences to shaping outcomes before they fully form. And in doing so, you protect not only your present, but the direction of everything that is still ahead. Awareness is the only way to break hidden manipulation cycles. Most people do not realize how easily human behavior can fall into cycles that repeat without conscious awareness. These cycles are not always dramatic or obvious. In fact, they often feel completely normal because they are built from everyday habits, familiar decisions, and automatic responses. A person reacts the same way to certain situations, repeats similar choices under pressure, and follows patterns of thinking that feel natural simply because they have been practiced over time. This is how cycles form, not through intention but through repetition. The danger of these cycles is not that they control you openly, but that they operate quietly in the background of your decisions. You may believe you are making fresh choices, yet often those choices are influenced by patterns already established in your thinking. This is where awareness becomes essential. Without awareness, repetition feels like freedom. But with awareness, repetition is recognized as structure, and structure can be changed. Many hidden influences in life rely on this lack of observation. They depend on predictability. When behavior becomes predictable, it becomes easier to anticipate. When actions become automatic, they become easier to guide. Not through direct force, but through subtle reinforcement of existing patterns. This is why cycles are so difficult to notice from inside them. They do not feel like traps, they feel like personality, habit, or preference. Breaking these cycles does not begin with force. It begins with recognition. The moment you start observing your own patterns, how you react, what you repeat, and why you make certain choices, you step outside of automatic behavior. You begin to see that not every response is intentional, and not every habit is necessary. This awareness creates space between stimulus and reaction, and in that space, change becomes possible. Awareness is not just understanding what is happening around you, it is understanding what is happening within you. And when that understanding becomes clear, the cycle loses its hidden control, because what was once automatic is now visible, and what is visible can always be changed. A major truth is about to be exposed through evidence and signs. There are moments in life when hidden things begin to surface in ways that cannot be ignored anymore. What once existed quietly in the background starts to reveal itself through patterns, coincidences, conversations, and unexpected confirmations. At first, these signs may seem unrelated, but over time they begin to connect, forming a clearer picture of something that was always there, just not fully understood. This is how truth often emerges, not suddenly but gradually through accumulation. Most people assume that truth arrives in a single moment of clarity, but in reality it is usually built through layers of evidence. A repeated situation, a consistent contradiction, a memory that resurfaces, or a detail that no longer fits the old explanation. These are the pieces that begin to challenge what was once believed. Individually, they may not seem powerful, but together they create a shift in perception that cannot easily be reversed. The challenge is that many people overlook these early indicators because they do not fit the story they expect. The mind tends to protect familiar beliefs, even when new information begins to suggest something different. This is why truth often feels delayed. It is not absent, it is simply being processed through resistance. But resistance cannot last forever. When enough signs accumulate, clarity becomes unavoidable. What is important to understand is that exposure does not always come in dramatic form. It often arrives quietly through consistent evidence that slowly removes doubt. Over time, What once felt uncertain becomes obvious. What once felt confusing becomes clear. And what once felt hidden becomes impossible to ignore. This is why awareness matters so deeply. When you are paying attention, you notice changes early. You see patterns forming before they fully develop. You recognize inconsistencies before they become undeniable. And in doing so, you position yourself ahead of confusion rather than inside it. A major truth does not need force to reveal itself. It only needs time, attention, and enough signs to break through denial. And when that moment arrives, everything that was unclear begins to align, showing that what was hidden was never gone. It was simply waiting to be seen. As we reach the end of this message, take a moment to understand what has truly been shared with you. Every part of this speech points to one powerful reality. Life does not change randomly, and nothing unfolds without a deeper pattern behind it. What feels sudden is often the result of long-term build-up. What feels confusing is often a sign that you are standing in the middle of a transition you cannot fully see yet. And what feels like uncertainty may actually be the early stage of clarity forming beneath the surface. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Hidden traps are rarely loud. They are built through repetition, comfort, ignored details, and unnoticed patterns. They do not appear all at once. They grow quietly until they begin to shape decisions, habits, and outcomes. This is why awareness is not optional in today's world. It is essential. The moment you begin to see patterns instead of isolated events, everything changes. You stop reacting blindly and start responding consciously. Perhaps you are currently in a phase where things feel unstable, unclear, or even overwhelming. But instability is not always a sign of danger. Sometimes it is a sign of exposure. It is life revealing what no longer fits, what no longer serves you, and what can no longer remain hidden. And while that process can feel uncomfortable, it is often the beginning of something far more aligned with your growth. Do not underestimate the power of awareness. It is the force that breaks cycles, exposes hidden patterns, and frees you from situations that operate beneath your conscious understanding. When you become aware, you step out of automatic living and into intentional direction. And in that space, you regain control, not over everything that happens, but over how clearly you see it. So as you leave this message, carry this truth with you. Not everything that feels like pressure is a threat, and not everything that feels like loss is an ending. Sometimes it is simply the moment you are being pulled out of what you could not see, so you can finally step into what you are meant to understand. Stay alert, stay aware, and never ignore the signs that are quietly guiding you toward clarity. Because once you see the pattern, you are no longer inside the trap.